The summer of 1985. Evette stood on the doorstep of a new life in Oakland, California. Her mom had moved away, leaving Evette with her grandmother, Gracie. Oakland in the mid-'80s was a city of contrasts, buzzing with diverse energy. The people were a mix of old-timers and newcomers, each with their own stories. The grand Victorian house whispered tales of a bygone era. Evette, 10 years old, felt a shiver as she stepped inside. Her adventure was just beginning. The house was a labyrinth of dimly lit hallways and rooms filled with shadows. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the heavy curtains. Evette reached the largest room, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed. Inside the closet, she found a collection of cracked porcelain dolls. Evette's breath caught in her throat. There, amidst the porcelain dolls, sat an Andy doll. Carefully, Evette lifted the doll from the shelf. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The first night in the old house was filled with strange noises. A sharp tapping jolted Evette awake. The Andy doll's head was turned, its cold blue eyes staring at her. Evette tried to ignore the strange occurrences. The Andy doll would move from her bed to the floor. Whispers, soft and unintelligible, slithered from the shadows. The doll was always at the center of these disturbances. One night, as the clock struck midnight, Evette was jolted awake by a sudden chill in the air. She glanced around her dimly lit room, her eyes drawn to the Andy doll sitting on her dresser. The room seemed to hum with an unsettling energy. Evette's heart pounded as she noticed the doll's eyes glinting in the moonlight, almost as if they were watching her. Gathering her courage, she approached the doll cautiously. As she reached out to touch it, a cold, invisible force seemed to push her hand away. Evette, whispering, scared. What's happening? A soft, almost imperceptible whisper filled the room, sending shivers down her spine. The words were unintelligible but carried a sense of foreboding. Terrified, Evette backed away, her eyes never leaving the doll. She knew, deep in her heart, that something was terribly wrong with Andy. The first encounter had left a mark, one that would haunt her nights to come. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of the nightmare that awaited her. Evette's cheerful demeanor faded. Withdrawn, her eyes clouded with fear. Nightmares plagued her. The Andy doll was at the heart of it. One evening, Gracie found Evette huddled in a corner. "Evette, darling, what's wrong?" Gracie asked softly. Evette spoke of the Andy doll, how it moved on its own, its eyes following her. Gracie's disbelief was evident, but unease grew beneath it. Gracie listened to Evette's story, her face etched with concern. "We need to get rid of this doll," Gracie said firmly. Under the cover of darkness, they snuck out to the backyard. Evette watched as Gracie buried the doll. Evette couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Peace returned to the old house. One night, Evette was awoken by an eerie silence. She saw a trail of dirt leading to the closet. With trembling hands, she reached for the doorknob. As the closet door swung open, a musty smell wafted out, sending a shiver down Evette's spine. The trail of dirt led directly to the top shelf, where the Andy doll sat, covered in dirt. A small, crumpled piece of paper lay on the shelf. "Thank you for bringing me home," the note read. The note fluttered from Evette's trembling fingers, landing silently on the dusty hardwood floor. Where was Gracie? She had to show her grandmother the note. She raced into the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the cold wood floor. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the creaking of the old house. She ran from room to room, her calls for Gracie growing more desperate. Driven by a desperate hope, Evette stumbled back through the house, her breath catching in her throat. The cool night air hit her like a slap, and there stood Gracie. Gracie turned, and the look on her face stopped Evette in her tracks. "Evette," she began, "this house, it has a dark past." The story tumbled from Gracie's lips, each word laced with a sadness that seemed to seep into Evette's very bones. The little boy had been about Evette's age, and the Andy doll had been his most prized possession. Gracie's voice cracked as she described the boy's sudden, tragic death. Some whispered of a terrible accident, others of a sudden illness. "It's tied to that doll, Evette." "We can't stay here, Evette," Gracie said, her voice firm but laced with sadness. "This house, it's not safe. We have to leave." Evette nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't need further convincing. The fear that had been simmering inside her now roared to life. They packed their belongings with a frantic energy. There was no time for goodbyes. As they drove away, the old Victorian house loomed large in the rearview mirror. Evette could have sworn she saw a figure standing in the upstairs window. The old Ford rumbled down the deserted highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Neither Evette nor Gracie spoke, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. Evette kept her eyes fixed on the road, willing the car to go faster. They had to keep moving, to put distance between them and the house. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pale pink and lavender, Gracie slowed the car to a stop at a deserted crossroads. "Evette, we can never go back there. Do you understand?" Evette nodded silently. "Gracie, what about the little boy?" Gracie's grip tightened. "He's trapped there, Evette, but we can't help him." With a sigh, Gracie turned the car onto a new road, the rising sun casting long shadows behind them. Years passed. Evette grew older, the memory of the Andy doll and the Victorian house fading to a distant, unsettling dream. But the events of that summer never truly left her, resurfacing in her nightmares, in the flicker of shadows, in the creaking of floorboards in an old house. Of haunted houses and restless spirits, her fascination tinged with a deep-seated fear. But her searches always came up empty, as if the house itself had vanished into thin air. Would always be tethered to that house, to the little boy trapped within its walls, a chilling reminder that some nightmares never truly end. Evette never forgot that summer. The Victorian house, the whispers from the walls, and the Andy doll with its chilling gaze. These memories remained etched in her mind. Years passed, and Evette tried to bury the fear and guilt. But the past resurfaced when least expected. She built a life far from Oakland, but echoes of that summer followed her. At night, she could almost hear the whispers that sent shivers down her spine. The Andy doll's grotesque smile haunted her dreams. She was drawn to news about haunted houses and restless spirits. Each story brought back memories of the darkness beneath the everyday world. She often thought about Gracie, her grandmother, who shared those nights with her. Gracie passed away, taking the full story of the Victorian house with her. Evette wished she had asked more questions, but it was too late now. One gray afternoon, while browsing a local antique shop, Evette stumbled upon a familiar sight. There, on a dusty shelf, sat an Andy doll. Its plastic skin was scratched and faded, its red hair matted and tangled, but its piercing blue eyes seemed to bore into her soul. She backed away, her heart pounding, her breath catching in her throat. The air around her crackled with unseen energy, whispers swirling around her. She fled the shop, her mind racing, echoes of that summer crashing over her. Driving home, streetlights cast eerie shadows. Evette felt watched. A cold dread settled over her, a chilling certainty that the past was not distant, that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. As she pulled into her driveway, her headlights illuminated the darkness. She saw a figure at the edge of the woods, clutching a familiar doll. Evette's heart raced as she fumbled with her keys, desperate to escape the chilling figure at the edge of the woods. As she finally got the door open and stumbled inside, she felt a cold, unnatural presence behind her. The air grew thick, the whispers louder, more insistent. She turned, and there stood the figure, now unmistakable in the dim light. It was Andy, his once plastic eyes now gleaming with something far more sinister. The doll in his arms seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Evette tried to scream, but no sound came out. She felt a force, an icy grip, pulling her towards Andy. She fought, but her limbs felt heavy, her mind clouded. The whispers grew deafening, a cacophony of voices urging her to give in. In a moment of sheer terror, she realized what was happening. Andy wasn't just a doll. He was a vessel, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent, and now he wanted her. Her vision blurred, the room spinning around her. She felt herself slipping away, her consciousness fading as Andy's presence grew stronger. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Andy's cold, triumphant smile. When she awoke, she was no longer herself. The whispers were gone, replaced by a chilling silence. She looked down at her hands, now small and plastic. She was trapped, a prisoner in her own body, as Andy took control. The past had finally caught up with her, and there was no escape. Andy had returned, and Evette's body was his to command. The house stood silent, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had claimed it. And in the shadows, the whispers began again, waiting for the next unwitting soul to fall into their grasp.
Beware, for the darkness never truly leaves. It waits, watching, ready to claim its next victim.